we're about to start a filming marathon up in here, so get used to seeing this a lot. Hi everybody, I'm Roxy, this is Chaotic Bibliophile, and today I'm going to tell you about my favorite books that I read in 2021 that are also fiction, because I already filmed my non-fiction list, which you can find linked down below and in the as always. I have a super paper that also reflects like my thought process. It was not that hard to come up with this list. I was able to be a bit ruthless, although I did have more options than the original 15. So it was in general a very good fiction year. I read a lot of classics and modern classics, which made me so happy. Yeah, I read a lot of really memorable books that also cemented my interest in certain authors. Before we get on with the list, however, I do want to mention a book that I consider an honorable mention, not because it didn't make the cut. I didn't even consider it for the list because my process of reading it wasn't a particularly enjoyable one. However, a year later, I still think about it and I might write a paper on it. And so I think it's only fair that I talk about this book in my yearly wrap-up. And that is JiYoung, born 1982. I didn't hate reading it, but I was very tired of it by the time the ending rolled around and sort of made me re-examine the whole book. In case you haven't heard yet, although this has been making the rounds all over BookTube and the world, it is about this unremarkable woman like any other called JiYoung, which was the most popular name for women in 1982 in South Korea. And it's just about her life and the micro and macro aggressions that she experiences because of misogyny, not only from men, but also from women. And yeah, it's an indictment of South Korea's specifically, but also of course very applicable to the rest of the world, deeply rooted misogyny. This book is written as a report. It's very dry. It almost does not read like fiction. And it also has footnotes, which kind of poses the question, why was this written as fiction instead of non-fiction? But there is something particularly rich as have it be fiction that is also the truth. And it also poses a lot of questions regarding aesthetics and is this political fiction when the message is so clear. It also has one paragraph that is such fine writing that it makes me think that this style is definitely a choice. And in that case, it's not bad writing, it's just the aesthetic choice. And even if it's an aesthetic choice that I don't necessarily agree with, I can still appreciate it, and it makes sense with the ending, and it's so masterful. It left such an impression on me, and I could write so much about it that I kind of need to reread it, but at the same time I don't want to because I didn't enjoy reading it the first time around. Maybe knowing the twist I would, I just don't know. So that was JiYoung 1982. I don't know what to say. It's not that I love the book, but maybe I do. I don't know. Have you ever experienced this with any book? Because I just don't know what to make of it. I might have to reread it, especially if I do a paper on it. I'll definitely reread it. So we'll see. So that was an honorable mention. Definitely not like number 16. It wasn't in my original all of the possibilities list. It was just something that I can't stop thinking about and that I had to share. Now let's move on with the list. Number 15 is Pnin by Vladimir Nabokov. I don't know if by the time this video is up, I will have uploaded the wrap up, but I definitely want it to be either the video that comes right before this one or the one that comes after this one. So either way, it will be up very, very soon because I'm so late and I'm so sorry. But this book is about Pnin, who is an exiled Russian professor living in America. It is heavily autobiographical. In a way, it draws from Nabokov's own experience, but also takes inspiration from Nabokov's one colleague. I don't remember his name at the moment. Yeah, it's Pnin's life and he's going about thinking about the past. It's very episodic and it is so good. I think it's very unique in its position because it is harsh in showing the realities of academia, but also the pleasures of it. So it doesn't have this rightly earned pessimism that infuses so many academic books nowadays because the academic conditions have changed so much. The reason this isn't higher up on the list is just I read it at a really bad time. My mind was going at a million miles per minute, pulling me in all these directions, good and bad. So I definitely want to reread it, and possibly even this year. Number 14, I have The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is an amazing modern classic about a butler who after World War II has found himself at the service of an American businessman, whereas his entire life he worked for the aristocracy. I'm sure everyone is sick of hearing this, but it is Downton Abbey vibes in the sense of the decaying aristocracy of the empire moving way for a new kind of aristocracy, which is the oligarchy. If you have enough money, it doesn't matter if you don't have that inherent pedigree, and how hierarchies are still there, but it's just a sort of different hierarchy. And it's funny because even the author and a lot of people read the ending as very optimistic, and I read it actually as quite sad. But maybe that's just me putting the lens of the alternative American model of meritocracy is not such. It's just a different form of hierarchy. So yeah, that's maybe why my interpretation of the ending is quite bleak. Nevertheless, it is a wonderful novel. It is very well paced. Writing is so subtle. You are in the mind of Stevens, who begins as a very sympathetic character, but then you begin to encounter a lot of resistance because of his values, and you really get to question whether he ever realizes the extent to which he's been primed to become this serving machine. I really want to watch the movie because although I know the actors in it are great and it is supposedly a great movie, I do think it's hard to access those subtleties that are present in the prose. Although he has moments of clarity, you wonder whether those are real or not, and you wonder to what extent he's manipulating you and to what extent he really believes these things. And there is a whole continuum there of unreliability, and I think Ishiguro is so in control here. Really recommend it. I mean, it doesn't need my endorsement, but it has it anyways. Number 13 is The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen. I have yet to read something by Jonathan Franzen that I haven't loved. This one is the story of a family. In particular, it's about this older marriage. The husband is starting to suffer from dementia, and the wife doesn't really know what to do with it. They have 3 children, and all of their children are going through their own stuff. There is a question of whether or not they will come visit them for Christmas. Within this very thin plot, we explore the past and the present and possible future of all these characters. It's written in a fantastic way. It's the best of the best of straight up narrative prose, although I don't think this style of writing is necessarily better than other styles of writing. I do think that Franzen does it to perfection. If you like family sagas, if you like real drama that's not melodramatic, but it is just plain old human drama, and you want to explore these characters, please read this. Number 12 is another family saga, The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan. When I picked this book up, I never imagined I would love it as much as I did, but alas, here we are. This is sold as a novel, but I'm convinced if this came out now, it would be sold as a collection of interconnected short stories. It is about 4 mothers and their daughters. The 4 mothers were all born and raised in China and came to America, and their children are all Chinese American. Some of them are more American than Chinese. And it's a very interesting and beautiful look into those relationships when you have such a different culture from your mother, but also you have bonds that are so profound because she's your mother. There's a whole gender aspect to it as well. It was unexpectedly well written. I'm sorry, Amy Tan. I couldn't have known. I didn't know. I just loved it so much. Number 11 was another unexpected gem, and that is Moon Tiger by Penelope Lively. Penelope Lively is amazing. Why isn't she a bigger part of the modern classic conversation? This story is about Claudia, a historian who is dying of old age, and in her deathbed she is reminiscing about her life, and her life is very interesting. She lived in Egypt, she had a lot of romance, She had a lot of heartbreak. She is also an intellectual, and it really is a fantastic novel. And it has such a sense of place, even though we are in the headspace of this woman. The pacing is amazing, but also slow and enveloping. And it was written in the 80s. It won the Man Booker, I think, in the 80s. It's incredible that it's not more discussed. It is stream of consciousness at times, but the way that dips in and out of and creates ambiguity there is so masterful. I am going to read more by her. I already have a book that I want to check out possibly this year, but if anything else, read Moon Tiger because it's so good. Number 10, The Lottery and Other Stories by Shirley Jackson. I have a whole review and discussion video, which I will link down below so you can check it out. And it is a great collection. Most of the stories are really strong. For such a long collection, I still remember a lot of the stories quite vividly. The way it's structured is very intentional, and though you can dip in and out of it or read the stories in any order and they are just as good, it does make sense to read it from cover to cover, and it is intentional and it is so good. Number 9, sadly, is not translated into English. I can't see that changing anytime soon, but if any translator is seeing this and they want to pick it up, please do. I think it would be quite interesting to see. This is Papelucho Gay en Dictadura by Juan Pablo Sutherland. This is a somewhat autofictional novel about a gay man, but at the beginning he's a kid growing up during the 80s dictatorship in Chile, but instead of focusing on the dictatorship itself, it focuses on the everyday, what it was like to be growing under such a militarized ethos at school, in the streets, what it was like to start attending Communist Party meetings, being gay, because for all their progressiveness, leftist parties can be extremely homophobic. If you've read Pedro Lemebel, you know this was also an issue for him. So it is fascinating on those accounts, but what really resonated with me most was the way it looks at pop culture and how the US specifically was dominating young people through fashion and through media and through this lifestyle idea. But it does so in a very fragmentary and interesting style where it has footnotes, but they are playful, but also very informative. I devoured this in one sitting. Number 8 is We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver. What an amazing book. Still think about it all the time. Think about the ideas, think about the way it was written. Some scenes have stuck with me, and I think it helps that I had seen the movie before, and so these were sort of playing out with the actors in my mind. This is about a woman who is writing letters to her estranged husband about something that happened with Kevin, which we find out later in the narrative, but not at the end. It's not like the huge reveal. It sort of slowly trickles down into the narrative rather, but it's not about that. I knew what he had done, so that wasn't the appeal for me, and it's certainly not the main appeal of the book. Even more than that, it is about motherhood and society and who is responsible for our children's actions. And we begin to question whether this woman's lack of attachment for her child might have negatively impacted him, or if he was a psychopath from birth. And it questions all these ideas. And the way it's written is amazing because it's an epistolary novel, which I didn't expect. But I believe it. I believe this is the voice of this woman, even though she's hyper-reflective and uses a lot of literary words. But because of how her character is constructed, I buy it. Please read this book. Number 7 is, I feel like I need to know more about sports to properly explain the metaphor of this book sliding into my faves at the last seconds of the game. Yeah. Anyways, Bewilderment by Richard Powers is just as good as everyone says. It is about this man who has recently lost his wife and is taking his son to camp and to explore the world. They are definitely both struggling. His son has some sort of diagnosis. A lot of people choose to read it as autistic. However, that is addressed in the book, and the father says, I've gotten 3 autistic diagnoses for ADHD and some other ones. And I think that's really important because diagnosing such conditions is so hard and people do tend to get a lot of different diagnoses. It is written beautifully. There is one thing that this book does that, of course, I won't spoil to you. And it's not a plot twist, but when I realized that it is what it was doing, I was like, oh. I also talked about this on my Bookstagram, so I will link the link to that post down below. It had that big of an impact on me. It made me post to my Bookstagram again. It is also technically a campus novel, I would say, very much qualifies because it is about academia and science and what science can do and should do and how we share or not share knowledge. It also is, of course, an eco-novel in the same way that the Overstory was. So if you're thinking whether to pick up one or the other, I would say favorite Bewilderment because it is a tighter, better wrapped up novel. Although the Overstory is amazing, that was Bewilderment. Number 6 is not a novel at all. It is a poetry collection, The Bees by Carol Ann Duffy. This is one of those books where after all this time, I still remember where I was when I read the biggest chunk of it, but also for a poetry collection, I still remember a lot of the poems. I remember exactly what I thought about them in the sense of there are many poems in here about the now. Of course, this is not that old, but it is, I think, more than 4 years old at this point. But about that now, it is still fresh enough that I know what it was referring to, if that makes sense. It's also a lot about the craft of writing and literature, and of course it does a lot of things with the bees. The intertextuality of it is so playful but so well done, so natural. It flows organically. Carol Ann Duffy just has that. So of course she earns a spot on this list. I definitely will reread it in the future and it's so good. So good. Number 5, surprisingly up. I don't know if it's because I love it more than, for example, Bewilderment. I think because I read it so long ago and I still think about it so much and it made me so happy. And that is Twinkle Twinkle by Kaori Ekuni. This is a modern classic of a novella by a largely forgotten author. I definitely want to read more by her. I don't know if there's anything else translated either to Spanish or English that I can check out. This is about a woman who has married a man who's gay, and she knows this and she does not care. In fact, her husband kind of cares more about it than she does. He has a boyfriend and it explores all those dynamics in very interesting ways. It is kind of sad, but also not dramatic at all. It shows the option of an alternative family and how that might come up. It is a very queer book if you think about it. It's so fascinating, all the dynamics that are at play. I think what struck me most is that she wants to please her parents, but ultimately needs to realize her unconventional way might make her happier. It's a really great novella that's also quite wholesome and not melodramatic at all. So really recommend it. Number 4 is Ready to Catch Him Should He Fall by Neil Bartlett. I will not extend myself more because you will hear me talk about this on my December wrap-up, and I don't even know if I like this novel anymore. I mean, I loved it from the beginning, but I read it knowing that I was going to analyze it. So it's about this teenager boy, capital B, who comes to the city. He stumbles across the bar, and there he meets Madame and a bunch of clients, an older man who will become his partner eventually. And it's an exploration of 80s scene in London in the face of the AIDS epidemic and homophobic attacks and homosexual socialization, how you acquire and interact with this culture and how your own identity arises from these encounters with other people like you. And it's narrated in this very interesting first-person situation where at times it is a specific bar patron, but at others it's this choral weep, and it's doing a lot of things with narrative because of course it's Neil Bartlett. I really wholeheartedly recommend it. Talking about it, I realize that I do like it, but I am not joking when I say that I don't know if I would ever reread it. Plus it has all my notes. I don't know, it would be like shock therapy. Number 3 is a surprise, Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I'm so happy that such a book won the Women's Prize because it's doing fascinating things. It's also an epistolary novel. It is about this guy who we know as Piranesi. He doesn't know exactly what he's doing other than recording, and he interacts with several entities in this old rundown house. We don't understand what's going on. It might be supernatural, it might not be, he might be going insane. What is happening? It is so eerie. But also the points that it makes are actually fascinating. It is so eerie and atmospheric, but also the way the facts are recorded is very believable. With epistolary novels, there's always a question of how much is believable that the person is actually writing down and how much it isn't. But here the conceit works very well. The conclusion is amazing. The sense of pacing, the sense of immersion, so good. This one is one that is not overhyped, which is rare these days. Number 2 is Killing and Dying by Adrian Tomine. Now though, because of another book that I read by him, I think it might be Tomine, because he might be Japanese American, maybe. So it might be Tomine. I'm sorry, I should definitely Google that name. But yeah, he is a graphic novelist and short story writer. He is amazing. This is a collection of short stories. And although I've read several stuff by him and I've liked all of it, I think this is his best. It's definitely hailed as such. And I can see why these stories, a lot of them are depressing, straight up. But they are not pointless. They are not misery porn at all. The art style, the coloring style. By the way, this was recommended to me by a bookseller at Mr. P's Emporium of Reading Delight in Bath. If you're ever there, please visit them. They just expanded and they are amazing. And she caught me looking at the graphic novels and she asked, I didn't really need recommendations. I already had so many books. But I said, sure, please. We talked for a bit and she recommended this one and I don't regret it. I have since bought so many of his books. I think I have 1 or 2 left to buy and I've been making my way through them and I will read more. But yes, if you like literary fiction and you like short stories and you are curious about the graphic form but haven't yet been sold on graphic novels, I definitely recommend this. I think it has a lot of crossover appeal. I think the art style is beautiful. Highly, highly recommend. And number 1, Undefeated, of course, is Nervous System by Lina Meruane. I'm going to plug my 5 contemporary Chilean authors video one more time. Link down below, because at that time I had not yet read this. I think I had only read Seeing Red, which I thought would make the list as well at the time. It was an option, it just got superseded by other books, but still very good. This one I think is a literal masterpiece. I think the way Lina Meruane constructs the narrative through fragments and does that reflective, almost essayistic thing, but at the same time creates such vivid characters. How does she do it? How does she do plot, character, and reflection so well in such an economic style? So it's about this woman who is trying and failing to complete her PhD. She studies astronomy, astrophysics, something sciencey. In that way, also kind of a campus novel. She does not spend much time in campus, but she does spend a lot of time thinking about her thesis. This woman, who's only referred to as Her, she is an immigrant in the country of the present, which we can understand it to be the US, but it's never specified. And then the country of the past, which is very recognizably Chile, but also never addressed as such. In there lives her father, her stepmom, and I don't remember if her siblings also live there. But she also looks into all these familiar relationships. And the plot starts because she is suffering from a physical condition which she's not sure whether is psychosomatic or just psychological or just physical, and she looks at the interrelation of the body and the mind and all these states and anxiety and connects that to the family, and the ways in which those elements are interwoven is brilliant. I don't want to be hyperbolic and set the novel up for failure, but I do feel like it's one of the best books I've ever read. I am going to definitely reread it this year. I brought it with me, which you can see in the books she carried video. It's one of the few books that I brought with me to reread. There we go. Those were my favorite reads of 2021. What a great reading year now that I've wrapped it up, because I had months that were sublimely good and then some months that were very terrible. It doesn't feel like it was a good year overall, but it actually was. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, please give a thumbs up, please subscribe and comment if you've read any of these books or you want to read any of these books. And of course, what was your best fiction last year? What is time? See you next time.